We have a large armada, flotilla, call it whatever you want, heading toward Iran right now. Hopefully we'll make a deal. If we do make a deal, that's good. If we don't make a deal, we'll see what happens.
Northern Persian Gulf, 31 kilometers south of Larak Island, 4:58 a.m. local time. The sea looked flat enough to be mistaken for safety. No whitecaps, no chop, just long, oily swells reflecting the faint orange glow of sunrise over the Iranian coast. For nearly 6 hours, nothing about the water suggested violence was imminent. Then, the silence broke. Across 5 separate coves carved into Iran's southern shoreline, engines ignited almost simultaneously. Not randomly, not hurriedly. Precisely on schedule. 34 fast-attack craft surged forward, their wakes slicing the water into widening V-shaped scars as they accelerated beyond 50 knots. Aboard them were nearly 190 Quds Force naval commandos, each carrying a specific role, a specific target, and a clear understanding that survival was optional. This was not harassment. This was not signaling. This was a full-spectrum asymmetric strike aimed at the most heavily defended naval asset on Earth, the USS Abraham Lincoln. What Iranian planners called Operation Ashura Tide had taken nearly 9 months to prepare. Mock carrier decks constructed inland, live fire rehearsals under blackout conditions, communications drilled to silence. Every timing window measured down to seconds, and the next 12 minutes would answer a question military analysts had debated for decades. Could massed, coordinated small craft overwhelm a nuclear-powered supercarrier's defensive envelope long enough to land a decisive blow? Or would the entire concept collapse under American firepower? The answer mattered far beyond the Persian Gulf. For Iran, success would validate its long-held doctrine that sacrifice, coordination, and saturation could neutralize technological superiority. For the United States, failure was unthinkable. But what the carrier strike group didn't know, what would later haunt after-action reviews, was that the attack had already begun long before the first boat moved. The attack before the attack. At 11:40 p.m., nearly 6 hours earlier, Iranian intelligence units activated a layered reconnaissance net stretching across 80 kilometers of Gulf waters. It didn't look like military activity. Dozens of fishing dhows adjusted their routes slightly. Tugboats loitered longer than usual near shipping lanes. Cargo skiffs slowed, then sped up, then slowed again. Small behaviors invisible to automated threat filters. But collectively, they painted a real-time picture. Each vessel carried low-power transponders and passive receivers, feeding encrypted bursts of data back to shore-based fusion cells. Radar sweeps, flight deck cycles, destroyer spacing, air patrol gaps. At the same time, commercial quad-rotor drones, disguised as weather monitoring platforms, lifted off from coastal rooftops and oil platforms. Flying below standard radar thresholds, they hovered at staggered altitudes, relaying visual confirmation of defensive posture. American sensors noticed them, but only as background noise. The drones were classified as civilian, the boats as routine traffic. No thresholds were crossed, no alerts escalated. By 4:20 a.m., Iranian planners had a nearly complete tactical snapshot of the carrier group's overnight disposition. They knew which destroyer had the clearest firing arcs. They knew which sector had the slowest response time. They knew exactly when the carrier would be transitioning between night and morning flight operations. That transition window, when radars retask, aircraft cycle, and crews shift watches, was the opening they needed. At 4:40 a.m., Iranian fast boats began moving, but not toward the carrier. They dispersed. Small clusters peeled off into separate holding zones, idling just beyond visual range, engines throttled low. From above, the pattern looked chaotic. From the command cell near Bandar Abbas, it was anything but. The formation was built in 3 layers. The outer layer consisted of 12 lightly crewed decoy craft. Their mission was simple: be seen, be loud, and draw fire. These boats carried radar enhancers, signal reflectors, and electronic noise emitters designed to exaggerate their threat profile. The middle layer, 18 boats, carried the primary strike force. These vessels were heavier, reinforced, and packed with Quds commandos armed with RPGs, recoilless rifles, and magnetized breaching charges designed for hull contact. The inner layer, 4 low-profile boarding craft, carried assault teams trained specifically for close quarters fighting inside American ships. Their goal was never to survive long. It was to reach steel. Every commander knew their timing window. Every boat knew when it was supposed to die. At 4:56 a.m., Iranian coastal observers transmitted the final clearance code. The carrier had just shifted internal flight operations. Aegis radar sectors were retasking. The window was open. At 5:02 a.m., the outer layer boats surged forward. They didn't form a line. They didn't cluster. They spread into a wide arc, approaching from staggered bearings at maximum speed. On the USS Abraham Lincoln, the Combat Information Center registered the change almost instantly. What began as 2 fast-moving surface contacts became 9, then 14, then over 30. Not smuggling traffic, not patrol boats, attack vectors. The radar screen bloomed with converging tracks, each closing rapidly, each time to compress the decision window for American commanders. Within seconds, routine watch posture vanished. General quarters alarms echoed through the carrier's internal passageways. Steel doors slammed shut. Crew members ran. The Lincoln had gone from peacetime operations to full combat readiness in under 90 seconds, and the Persian Gulf was about to erupt. 5:03 a.m. inside the carrier's Combat Information Center. The surface warfare coordinator leaned forward, eyes locked on the primary tactical display. The contacts weren't just fast, they were organized. Vectors converging from multiple bearings, speed holding above 48 knots, no course corrections, no hesitation. This wasn't a probe. Multiple surface threats confirmed, the watch officer called out. Count now 32. Correction, 34. All inbound. The Lincoln's captain stepped into the CIC seconds later, still pulling on his cranial headset. One glance told him everything he needed to know. This was a swarm. Sound general quarters, he ordered. Weapons free on hostile craft. Push the screen forward. The carrier strike group reacted instantly. 2 escorting destroyers surged ahead of the formation. Throttles slammed open, bows digging into the water as they accelerated to intercept. Their job was brutally simple. Die first if necessary, so the carrier wouldn't have to. Above them, 2 Super Hornets already airborne broke formation and dove toward the surface contacts, afterburners igniting as they dropped from patrol altitude. The Gulf air compressed violently around them. At 5:05 a.m., the outer layer Iranian boats intentionally broke radio silence. Open-channel transmissions flooded maritime frequencies, shouting, static. False distress calls mixed with religious chants and clipped command phrases. It was noise warfare. American fire control systems lit up as the first destroyer's radar locked onto the most aggressive contacts. The loudest, fastest, most visible boats charging straight in. Exactly as Iranian planners intended. Engage lead contacts, came the order. The first 25mm autocannon barked to life. Tracer rounds stitched the water ahead of the lead Iranian craft, then walked up its hull. The boat exploded into fragments as its fuel ignited, the blast briefly illuminating the dawn like a camera flash. 2 seconds later, another decoy boat disintegrated under sustained fire. A third slewed sideways, engine shredded, pitching its crew into the sea. But while American guns focused forward, the real threat moved sideways. The second wave slips in. At 5:06 a.m., the middle layer boats accelerated. They didn't charge directly at the carrier. They angled, cutting across blind spots, forcing defenders to pivot. Radar operators shouted updates as fresh contacts appeared closer than expected. "New group! Port quarter! Closing fast!" One destroyer swung hard to bring its guns to bear, momentarily exposing its opposite side. That half-second mattered. Iranian boats scattered, zigzagging violently, some jinking unpredictably, while others maintained straight-line, suicidal runs. It overwhelmed targeting logic. American cannons roared continuously now, the sound rolling across the water like sustained thunder. Boats were shredded mid-turn. Crews vanished in fire and spray. Hulls split open like tin cans. 5 Iranian craft were destroyed in under a minute, but not all of them. 8 boats punched through the outer defensive screen. Range to the carrier dropped below 3 kilometers. At 5:07 a.m., the Super Hornets arrived. They came in low and fast, less than 300 feet above the water, cannons firing in controlled bursts. The recoil visibly rocked the aircraft as streams of 20mm rounds ripped across the surface. One Iranian boat vanished entirely, reduced to debris and smoke. Another burst into flames, spinning out of control before capsizing, but the pilots couldn't stay. Flying that low put them inside potential small arms and RPG range. They climbed sharply, banking away to reset for another pass. The boats kept coming. No evasive retreat. No loss of momentum. These men weren't reacting. They were executing. At 5:08 a.m., the final defensive ring activated. Inside the carrier's superstructure, automated systems switched from standby to autonomous engagement. White dome housings rotated smoothly. Internal radars locked. Computers calculated firing solutions faster than any human could track. The close-in weapon systems spun up. The sound was unmistakable. A rising electric whine followed by a deep, continuous roar. Streams of tungsten rounds reached out across the water, stitching lines of destruction toward anything moving too fast, too close. The first boat exploded violently, its hull ripped apart in a fraction of a second. The second was cut nearly in half, sinking before its fireball fully collapsed. A third boat tried to veer away, throttles maxed, hull skipping across the surface, and was erased mid-turn. But then, one contact didn't die. At 5:09 a.m., a single Iranian craft surged through overlapping fire. Its pilot drove straight into the storm, weaving through spray columns thrown up by near misses. Rounds tore through the water around it, but not through it. 800 meters, 600, 400. A commando rose from the deck, bracing against the railing. An RPG launcher flashed. The rocket streaked forward and struck the carrier's hull just above the waterline near the stern. The explosion cracked sharp and loud, echoing across the Gulf. Metal buckled inward. Paint vaporized. A localized fire erupted inside a storage compartment. Damage control teams were moving within seconds. The breach was contained, but the impossible had happened. A supercarrier had been touched. The attacking boat was obliterated moments later, caught in overlapping fire from two systems that shredded it into nothing. But the message was already sent. The armor was not absolute. 5:10 a.m. The tempo shifted, not because the Iranian boats were gone, but because they stopped trying to win. Surviving craft broke formation almost simultaneously, executing a maneuver American analysts would later label pre-planned disengagement under pressure. Engines screamed as throttles slammed forward, bows lifting slightly as the boats peeled away from the carrier in disciplined arcs. They didn't scatter randomly. They turned northeast, straight toward waters everyone in the region understood carried invisible teeth. Minefields, mobile missile batteries, coastal radar overlap zones. Inside the carrier's Combat Information Center, the realization hit instantly. "They're not running," a tactical officer said quietly. "They're pulling us." American destroyers began to edge forward instinctively, fire control solutions already recalculating. The instinct to finish the job, remove every remaining threat, was powerful. But that instinct was exactly what the retreat was designed to exploit. Iranian coastal doctrine had always treated pursuit as the real kill zone. Fast boats were expendable. Destroyers were not. The boats fleeing now were broadcasting deliberately. Navigation lights flickered on. Transponders spiked. Radar signatures inflated artificially. They wanted to be followed. Every kilometer closer to the Strait of Hormuz multiplied Iranian advantage. Shore-based anti-ship missiles could be active in minutes. Sea mines didn't care about allegiance, and coastal clutter would degrade American targeting fidelity. One wrong move could trade a dozen destroyed boats for a damaged destroyer. The carrier's captain didn't hesitate. "Hold position," he ordered. "Do not pursue beyond the perimeter. Defensive posture only." The command was repeated across the formation. The chase died before it began. The surviving Iranian boats escaped, not because they were faster, but because they had planned for restraint. By 5:14 a.m., the firing stopped. Smoke drifted low over the water. Burning fuel spread across the surface in shimmering sheets. Pieces of fiberglass, metal, and equipment bobbed among the waves. Men floated too, some motionless, some clinging to debris, some waving, shouting, disappearing beneath swells. American helicopters lifted off within minutes, skimming low as rescue swimmers were deployed. Not out of mercy, but intelligence necessity. Survivors meant answers. By 5:30 a.m., the engagement was over. Total elapsed time from first radar detection to disengagement. 12 minutes. 12 minutes that would ripple outward for years. The numbers came in slowly, then all at once. Of the 34 Iranian fast attack craft launched, 18 were completely destroyed. 7 were disabled or sinking. 9 escaped intact. Of the nearly 190 Quds force personnel committed, 44 confirmed dead. 61 recovered alive from the water. 85 retreated aboard surviving vessels. The carrier's damage was technically minor. A hull breach less than 2 meters wide. Localized fire damage. No casualties. No operational degradation. Flight operations resumed within hours. But no one aboard mistook minor for meaningless. A layered defense had been penetrated. And that changed everything. Within Iran, state media moved fast. Footage of burning water, images of commandos returning to shore, carefully framed shots of the carrier's scarred hull. Casualty numbers were omitted. The narrative was simple. America had been hit. Inside Iranian military circles, the reaction was more divided. Hardliners celebrated proof that a carrier could bleed. Pragmatists questioned whether losing dozens of elite operators for symbolic damage was sustainable doctrine. But the point had already been made. Asymmetric warfare didn't need to win. It only needed to disrupt certainty. Across the Gulf, defense ministries ran emergency assessments. Saudi procurement officials accelerated naval air defense upgrades. The UAE fast-tracked coastal surveillance expansions. Insurance underwriters quietly raised premiums on tanker traffic. Within 72 hours, risk models for the Strait of Hormuz were rewritten. For decades, Iranian threats to close the strait had been theoretical. Now, there was data. American analysts reached an equally unsettling conclusion. The defense systems worked. The ships survived. Loss ratios were overwhelmingly favorable. And yet, a coordinated swarm, executed with discipline and sacrifice, had forced penetration. That meant future attackers would learn, refine, scale. Neither side had won decisively. Iran proved it could strike the untouchable. The United States proved it could absorb the blow, which meant the next encounter would be deadlier, more desperate, and less restrained. In 12 minutes of violence, no war was started. But the rules shifted. The Persian Gulf remained open. The carrier sailed on. Yet every radar contact after that morning was viewed differently. No longer as routine traffic, but as potential geometry for the next swarm. Because once invincibility cracks, even slightly, it never fully seals again.